I used to believe in fairy tales, the kind where love conquers all, and happy endings weren't just possible, they were inevitable. Rebecca and I met at a fundraiser for children with cancer. I was there representing my family's pharmaceutical company. She was a biochemist volunteering her expertise. When she smiled at me from across the room, something clicked into place. Her intelligence was intoxicating. The way she spoke about molecular structures with such passion and precision, I fell hard and fast. Within a year, we were married. My parents were cautious. They always were about my relationships. But they welcomed her into our family with open arms. My father even offered her a position in our research department. "Keep your brilliant wife close," he'd said with a wink. "She's going to change lives." The first 2 years were everything I'd dreamed of. We purchased a colonial revival house with blue shutters on the outskirts of Boston. Rebecca transformed the basement into a home laboratory where she'd work late into the night on her special projects. I never questioned her dedication. It was one of the things I loved most about her. My family's company was thriving, with our newest line of medications for autoimmune disorders becoming a market leader. We decided to try for a baby on our 2nd anniversary. I'd always wanted to be a father, to create the family I'd always envisioned. But month after month, nothing happened. The disappointment became routine, like a dull ache that never quite went away. After a year of trying, we saw specialists. The verdict was crushing: unexplained male infertility. The doctors couldn't pinpoint why, but my body wasn't producing viable sperm. Rebecca was surprisingly stoic about it. "There are other ways to have a family," she'd said, squeezing my hand. "Besides, I have you. That's enough for me." Her understanding only made me love her more deeply. When I sank into depression, she was there with gentle encouragement and unwavering support. She even started preparing special health smoothies for me every morning, a blend of fruits, supplements, and herbs she researched specifically to improve fertility. "Trust me," she'd say, handing me the greenish-brown concoction. "I'm putting all my biochemistry knowledge to work for us." I drank them faithfully, even though they tasted increasingly bitter. For her, for us, I would have done anything. The symptoms began subtly, fatigue that seemed natural given my 60-hour work weeks. Then came the tremors in my hands, barely noticeable at first, but eventually severe enough that I struggled to sign documents. My doctor prescribed rest, suggesting it was stress-related. But rest didn't help. Next came the unexplained bruising, nosebleeds, and hair falling out in clumps on my pillow. By the time I was hospitalized, my kidneys were failing. The medical team was baffled by my rapid decline. "Your symptoms are consistent with heavy metal poisoning," my doctor explained. "But we can't determine the source." Through it all, Rebecca was the perfect wife. She rarely left my hospital room, advocating fiercely with the medical staff, researching potential treatments, and holding my hand through the worst of the pain. When my father suggested flying in specialists from Europe, she coordinated everything. When my mother brought homemade soup, Rebecca insisted on being the one to feed me, spoonful by spoonful. One night, delirious with fever, I woke to find her adjusting my IV. Something about her methodical movements seemed strange, clinical. For a fleeting moment, her face looked different. Not the expression of a concerned wife, but something colder, more calculated. When she noticed I was awake, her features instantly rearranged into a smile. "Just checking your fluids, darling," she whispered, stroking my cheek. "Go back to sleep." I dismissed the moment as a fever dream. After all, this was Rebecca, my Rebecca, the woman who held me through the darkest night of my infertility diagnosis, the woman who vowed to stand by me in sickness and in health. How could I have known that the sickness was by her design, that each morning, when she handed me those fertility smoothies with a loving smile, she was slowly, deliberately poisoning me to death? My father always said that truth reveals itself in unexpected ways. For me, it happened at Boston Logan International Airport, Terminal E, where international flights depart and arrive in a constant stream of dreams and destinations. I wasn't supposed to be there that day. After 3 months of aggressive treatment, I'd been released from the hospital just a week before. My doctors were mystified by my improvement, which coincided perfectly with Rebecca taking a research trip to Switzerland. "Your body is finally fighting back," they said. Nobody considered that perhaps the poisoning had simply stopped. My strength was returning, though I still moved like an old man, leaning heavily on a cane. I was supposed to be resting at home, but my assistant had called about important documents that needed my signature for a merger we'd been working on before my illness. The courier had missed our arrangement, and the papers needed to be on a flight to London that evening. "I can manage it," I told her, craving any semblance of my former productive life. The terminal was crowded, a symphony of announcements and hurried goodbyes. I handed over the package to the airline representative, feeling a small victory in completing such a simple task independently. As I turned to leave, fatigue washed over me. I spotted an empty seat near the windows overlooking the tarmac and made my way over, planning to rest before the long journey back to the parking garage. That's when I saw her, Rebecca, my wife, who was supposed to be in Zurich for another 3 days. She stood at the check-in counter for a flight to Buenos Aires, her sleek black travel suit a stark contrast to the sunshine yellow dress she'd worn when she kissed me goodbye. Her hair, normally worn long and loose the way I preferred, was cut short and dyed a rich auburn, but it was unmistakably her. The graceful curve of her neck, the precise way she gestured when speaking. Confusion gave way to curiosity as I watched her present her passport. Why would she be flying to Argentina instead of returning home to her recovering husband? Perhaps it was a connecting flight. Perhaps there was a simple explanation. Then I saw her glance nervously around the terminal, the furtive movement so unlike my confident wife. When the airline attendant returned her documents, I caught a glimpse of the passport in her hand. Navy blue, but not American. From my angle, I couldn't see the country, but I could clearly read the name printed on the boarding pass. Valeria Kozlova. The world tilted on its axis. I gripped my cane so tightly my knuckles turned white. Who was this woman using a different name? What had happened to the conference in Switzerland? Why was she traveling to South America under a false identity? My thoughts raced back to the bitter smoothies, the mysterious illness, the moments in the hospital when I'd caught flashes of something cold in her eyes. Pieces began clicking into place, forming a picture so horrific my mind initially rejected it. But there she was, evidence in plain sight, preparing to disappear to another continent while I recovered from months of inexplicable poisoning. I needed to know more. Summoning strength I didn't know I had, I pulled myself to my feet and followed her at a distance. She collected her boarding pass and proceeded to security, rolling a single carry-on suitcase I'd never seen before. I trailed behind, heart pounding painfully against my weakened ribs, until she stopped at a currency exchange booth. Finding a seat with a clear view, I watched as she exchanged a thick envelope of cash. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands and zoomed in to take photos. As she counted the unfamiliar bills, something fell from her purse. A small glass vial that rolled across the floor. She quickly retrieved it, but not before I captured that image too. A memory surfaced. Rebecca in our kitchen, carefully measuring powder into my breakfast drink. "These minerals will help your body recover," she'd explained. "They taste bitter, but they're exactly what you need." My phone buzzed with an incoming call. "My father," I answered in a whisper. "Daniel, where are you? The hospital called looking for you." "Dad," I managed, my voice barely audible. "I need help. I'm at Logan. Terminal E. I think Rebecca's been poisoning me." There was a beat of silence. Then, "Don't approach her. Don't let her see you. I'm calling our security team. They'll be there in 15 minutes. Can you stay hidden until then?" "Yes," I whispered, shrinking behind a pillar as Rebecca scanned the terminal. "But Dad, she's boarding soon. She's using a different name. She's running." "We'll stop her," he promised. "Daniel, listen to me carefully. If what you're saying is true, you're in danger. Stay in public areas. Keep people around you. I'm on my way." As I ended the call, Rebecca, or whoever she really was, slipped the currency into her purse and headed toward the security checkpoint. With each step she took, My entire reality unraveled. The woman I'd shared my bed with. The woman I'd trusted with my life. The woman I'd loved so completely. She was a stranger, a poisoner, an assassin. And I had nearly become her perfect victim. Time stretched like taffy as I watched her move through security. Each minute was excruciating. My body weakened from months of poisoning, my mind reeling from betrayal. I kept my distance, using other travelers as shields while my phone continued to capture evidence. Rebecca, or Valeria, was methodical, calm. She had placed her wedding ring in the security bin alongside her shoes, and I noticed how easily she slipped it off, as though it had never meant anything at all. Security guards appeared at my side 15 minutes later, just as my father had promised. Discreet men in casual clothing with earpieces and alert eyes. "Mr. Harrington," one said quietly, "your father sent us. We need to move you somewhere safe while the authorities handle this." "No," I insisted, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "I need to see this through." They didn't argue, but positioned themselves strategically around me. One made a call, speaking in hushed tones about flight manifests and international arrests. I caught fragments. "Ugh. False passport. Poisoning attempt. Flight risk." My phone rang again, my father. "The FBI is on their way," he said without preamble. "And I've got our legal team assembling evidence from your medical records. Stay where you are." "Dad," I whispered, "how could I have been so blind?" His voice softened. "This isn't your fault, son." But it felt like my fault. Every memory replayed with new context. Rebecca's insistence on preparing my food, her convenient research trips that coincided with my worst symptoms, the offshore accounts I'd discovered last year that she'd explained away as family investments abroad. I'd trusted her explanations because I loved her, because I couldn't imagine the alternative. While we waited for authorities, one of the security team, a former military intelligence officer, scrolled through my phone, examining the photos I'd taken. "The vial?" he said, zooming in on the image. "That looks like thallium. It's a heavy metal, virtually tasteless, causes symptoms that mimic other conditions. Popular with assassins because it's hard to detect unless specifically tested for thallium." The word lodged in my throat like a stone. My Rebecca, biochemist, researcher, my wife, had been systematically poisoning me with a professional assassin's weapon of choice. But why? What could be worth destroying our life together? The answer arrived with a call from our company's chief financial officer. He'd been conducting an audit at my father's request during my illness. "Daniel," he said urgently, "we found something. Rebecca's credentials. They're fabricated. Every publication, every reference, every degree. All elaborate forgeries. And there's more. She's been systematically copying research data, transferring files on experimental compounds. We think she's industrial espionage, working for Verkstrom Pharmaceuticals. Verkstrom, our biggest competitor. The company that would benefit most from our new autoimmune drug failing before it reached market. The company that would pay millions for our proprietary formulas." The truth crashed down like an avalanche. I wasn't just a husband. I was a mark. Rebecca hadn't married me for love. She'd married me for access. My position in the company, my family connections, my trusting nature, all valuable assets to exploit. And when she'd gathered what she needed, she began eliminating the loose end I represented. My infertility. Had that been her doing too? Had she been poisoning me from the beginning, ensuring we could never have children who might complicate her exit strategy? The thought made my stomach heave. I steadied myself against a wall, fighting waves of nausea and betrayal. Federal agents arrived, moving with practiced efficiency. They intercepted Rebecca just as she approached her departure gate. I watched from a distance as confusion crossed her face, then something like resignation. She didn't resist as they led her away. She didn't look frightened or angry. She looked annoyed, as though this were merely an inconvenience in her carefully constructed plan. I followed at a safe distance as they escorted her to a private room for initial questioning. One agent broke away, approaching me with a grim expression. "Mr. Harrington, I'm Special Agent Dawson. We need to take your statement, but first, I want you to know we found some concerning items in her luggage. Multiple passports, burner phones, and vials that our preliminary tests indicate contained thallium compounds. My legs gave way. The security guards caught me before I hit the floor. "She was going to disappear," I whispered. "If I hadn't seen her today, she would have vanished, and I never would have known why I was dying." "You're very lucky, sir," Agent Dawson said. "Most victims of this type of poisoning don't get answers." Lucky. The word was a bad joke. I'd spent 3 years of my life loving a woman who never existed. I'd shared my home, my family, my company secrets, and my body with someone who had been killing me slowly, patiently, drop by poison drop. They seated me in another private room to wait. My father arrived, his face aged a decade in a single afternoon. He embraced me with rare emotion. "The doctors," I said into his shoulder. "They need to know it was thallium. They need to change my treatment." "Already done," he assured me. "A medical team is waiting at Massachusetts General. We're admitting you as soon as we're finished here." "I want to see her," I said suddenly. My father pulled back, studying my face. "Daniel, that's not a good idea." "I need to look her in the eye," I insisted. "I need to know if any of it was real." After conferring with the agents, they arranged a brief, controlled encounter. For my protection, they said, I would view her through one-way glass. She would not see me. I would not speak to her. I would simply observe while they conducted their initial interview. They led me to an observation room, and there she was, seated at a table, her hands cuffed before her. Her new auburn hair was coming loose from its chignon. Her expression was completely neutral. No fear, no remorse, no anger, just calm assessment, like a chess player evaluating her remaining moves. The Rebecca I knew would have been terrified, emotional. This woman was a stranger wearing my wife's face. As the agents questioned her, she answered with crisp precision, neither confirming nor denying anything significant. But when they mentioned my name, Daniel Harrington, something flickered across her features. Not guilt, not love, something closer to annoyance. "Your husband nearly died," one agent said. "The doctors say his kidneys may never fully recover." She tilted her head slightly. "If that were true," she replied, in a voice I barely recognized, "he would already be dead." The dosage was calculated precisely. My blood turned to ice. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that everything had been a lie. Every kiss, every promise, every tear she'd shed over our inability to conceive. Every night she'd held me through the pain she herself had caused. I turned away, unable to watch anymore. In the sterile airport security room, as planes continued taking off and landing outside, carrying people to new beginnings and homecomings, I mourned the death of something that had never truly existed. 3 weeks after the airport, I sat across from her in an interview room at the Federal Detention Center. My doctors had advised against it. My father had called it reckless. My lawyers had drafted elaborate statements explaining why this meeting was unnecessary for the case against her. But there were questions only Rebecca could answer. Questions that haunted my days and terrorized my nights. I needed to look into the eyes of the woman who had methodically poisoned me and ask her why. The room was stark. White walls, metal table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs, and a guard stationed in the corner. A video camera recorded from above. My lawyers waited outside, ready to intervene if necessary. The government had agreed to this meeting only because I'd refused to cooperate otherwise. They needed my testimony to build an airtight case not just for attempted murder, but for international espionage. When they brought her in, the shock of seeing her nearly knocked the breath from my lungs. Her prison uniform hung loosely on her frame. Without makeup, her features seemed sharper, stripped of the softness I'd associated with her. The auburn dye was growing out, revealing her natural blonde at the roots. Her hands were cuffed in front of her. She sat down without looking at me. The guard secured her restraints to a metal loop on the table. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I studied the woman I had once worshipped. This stranger who had shared my bed, infiltrated my family, and poisoned my body with methodical precision. Her posture remained perfect, her breathing even, No sign of the emotional wreckage I'd been living in. "Rebecca," I began, then stopped myself. "Or should I call you Valeria?" Her eyes finally met mine, cool and assessing. "Either name is a construct," she replied, her voice clinical. "Use whichever you prefer. Who are you?" The question felt ridiculous even as I asked it. 3 years of marriage, and I was asking the most basic question two people could exchange. A slight shrug. "That's complicated." "Then uncomplicate it for me," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "You owe me that much." "I don't owe you anything," she replied without malice. "But if it helps you process, I'll explain. I am an operative trained to acquire specific information from target organizations. Your company was developing compounds that certain interested parties wanted. I was contracted to retrieve them." "By posing as a biochemist? By marrying me?" "The initial assignment was simply to gain employment with your company. Marriage wasn't originally part of the plan." A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. "But you were so enthusiastic in your attention. It presented an efficient path to deeper access." The clinical way she described our courtship, our love story, sent ice through my veins. "And the poisoning? Was that part of the original plan too?" She adjusted her position slightly, the only sign of discomfort she'd shown. "That became necessary when the audit was announced. I needed to create a distraction while I gathered the remaining research. Your illness diverted attention, created sympathy, and gave me access to files during the confusion. You could have just disappeared with what you had already stolen. Incomplete data is worthless. I needed the entire research protocol." Her gaze was steady, unapologetic. "Your death would have been attributed to natural causes eventually. No one tests for thallium unless they're specifically looking for it." The coldness of her calculation staggered me. "Did you ever feel anything for me? Anything real?" For the first time, she seemed to consider her words carefully. "Attachment is a liability in my profession." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer that matters." She leaned forward slightly. "Would it comfort you to believe I felt conflicted? That I shed tears while measuring the poison? Would a pretense of remorse make your recovery easier?" "I want the truth," I insisted. "After 3 years of lies, I deserve at least that—" Something shifted in her expression. Not softening exactly, but a slight recalibration. "The truth, then. There were moments of genuine connection. Your kindness was unexpected. Your trust was complete in a way I hadn't encountered before. That created certain complications." "Complications," I repeated hollowly. "Is that what you call it when you realize you're murdering a human being who loves you?" "Love is a neurochemical response," she countered. "A survival mechanism with no place in my reality. And yet, here you are, surviving quite poorly at the moment." The flash of anger felt good, better than the aching emptiness that had become my constant companion. A slight inclination of her head acknowledged the hit. "An operational failure I'm still analyzing." I laughed without humor. "That's one way to describe facing 30 years to life for attempted murder and espionage. The legal consequences are temporary setbacks." Her confidence was unnerving. "Arrangements are being made." The implication chilled me. Whoever she worked for, whatever organization had planted her in my life, they had resources and reach. They wouldn't abandon their asset easily. "You won't escape this," I said, with more conviction than I felt. "Every law enforcement agency in the country is involved now. Your diplomatic back channels won't work." "Perhaps," she conceded. "But that's no longer your concern. You made it my concern when you decided to kill me." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "If I had decided to kill you, Daniel, you would be dead. The dosage was carefully calculated to create serious illness, not death. Your recovery was always anticipated." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. "You wanted me to suffer, not die? I needed you incapacitated but alive. A death would have triggered investigations that might have complicated my exit. The calculated cruelty of it, poisoning me just enough to destroy my health but not enough to kill me, was almost worse than if she'd simply wanted me dead." "The infertility," I said suddenly. "Was that your doing too?" Something flickered across her face. The first genuine emotion I'd seen. "No, That was an unfortunate coincidence. But convenient for you, I pressed. No children to complicate your exit strategy. Yes, she admitted. Convenient. I leaned forward, studying her. You know what I think? I think somewhere along the way you started believing your own cover story. I think there were moments, real moments, when you forgot you were playing a role. And I think that terrified you. Her jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. You're projecting emotional narratives to make sense of a situation too painful to accept at face value. Maybe, I conceded. Or maybe I'm the only person who's ever seen behind your mask, and that's why you had to destroy me. Not for the company secrets, not for the mission, but because I made you feel something real. She stood abruptly, the chains of her handcuffs pulling taut against the table. This conversation has ceased being productive. The guard stepped forward, but I raised a hand. Just one more question. She remained standing, her posture rigid. Our anniversary dinner 2 months before you started poisoning me, I said quietly. You cried when you gave me that watch. Was that part of your training too? Did they teach you how to cry on command? For the briefest moment, something raw and unguarded crossed her face. Then it was gone, sealed behind the impenetrable mask she wore so effortlessly. Guard, she called, turning away from me. I'm ready to return to my cell. As they led her away, she paused at the door. Without turning back, she said, the watch was personal, not operational. Then she was gone, leaving me alone with that small, painful shard of truth, the only real thing she'd ever given me. The poisoning left its signature on every system of my body. My kidneys functioned at 60% capacity. My hands still trembled when I was tired. My immune system remained compromised, leaving me vulnerable to infections. The doctors spoke of remarkable recovery and beating the odds, but the truth was written in my medical chart and reflected in the bottles of medications lining my bathroom cabinet. I was alive, but forever changed. In the months following Rebecca's arrest, I threw myself into the investigation. My statement to the FBI ran to 78 pages. I surrendered our home to evidence collection, watching strangers in hazmat suits dismantle the life I thought I'd been building. They found her hidden laboratory in a sealed section of our basement, accessible through a false wall in the wine cellar. There, amid sophisticated equipment and carefully labeled compounds, they discovered her journals, meticulously documented observations of my slow poisoning, recorded with scientific detachment. Subject showing increased fatigue. Thallium levels in hair sample, 1.8 ppm. Increasing dosage by 0.25 milligrams tomorrow. Tremors now visible. Subject attributes symptoms to work stress. Cognitive function beginning to show impairment. Forgot dinner plans with parents. Implementing second phase of extraction plan while maintaining current dosage level. I read every word, forcing myself to confront the calculated cruelty of her actions. Each entry was a knife thrust, cutting away the lingering illusions I'd maintained about our marriage. There was no hidden love story here, no reluctant assassin torn between duty and emotion. There was only clinical precision and professional detachment. Industrial espionage evolved into charges of attempted murder, identity fraud, and conspiracy. The trial became a media sensation. Biochemist bride poisons pharmaceutical heir. The tabloids feasted on our story, painting me as the gullible husband and her as the calculating black widow. Our wedding photos were splashed across newspapers, analyzed by body language experts who claimed they could see the deception in her smile, the calculation in her eyes. I avoided the coverage as much as possible, but found myself obsessively reading the comments sections late at night, drawn to the brutal assessments of strangers. How did he not know? 3 years married and he never suspected? Rich boy thought he could buy love. Got what he deserved. She's hot, though. Can't blame him for being stupid. My father hired security to keep reporters away from our family estate, where I'd retreated during my recovery. My mother managed my medical care with military precision, arranging specialists and alternative therapies. My younger sister flew home from graduate school in California, putting her studies on hold to help with the family business while I focused on healing. They surrounded me with love and protection, but I felt their unspoken questions. How could you not have known? How could you have brought this woman into our lives, given her access to everything? The same questions I asked myself in the darkness of each sleepless night. Rebecca, Valeria, whatever her real name was, refused to cooperate with authorities. She maintained stoic silence during interrogations, offering no information about her employers or her background. The multiple passports found in her possession linked to identities scattered across Eastern Europe and South America, all meticulously constructed, but ultimately untraceable. The only time she broke her silence was to request specific books from the prison library, advanced texts on biochemistry and philosophy, which the FBI monitored carefully for hidden messages. 6 months after her arrest, 2 guards at the Federal Detention Center were found unconscious during a routine shift change. Rebecca's cell was empty, the security systems disabled with expert precision. A nationwide manhunt ensued. Her face appeared on digital billboards and news broadcasts. Border security was heightened. 3 days later, a maintenance worker at a marina in Maine discovered a small sailboat missing. Camera footage showed a woman with cropped black hair and sunglasses boarding the vessel before dawn. By the time authorities connected the theft to Rebecca's escape, she had likely crossed into international waters. When the FBI delivered the news of her escape, I felt something unexpected: relief. The trial had promised to be a prolonged dissection of our marriage, every intimate detail examined for signs of her deception and my blindness. Now that public spectacle would be avoided, even as justice remained unserved. "We'll find her," the lead agent assured me. "No one stays invisible forever." But I knew better. Invisibility was her profession. Disappearing was her art form. The woman who had vanished from my cell at Logan Airport had been practicing vanishing acts her entire life. With the immediate legal proceedings suspended, I faced the harder challenge: rebuilding a life from the wreckage of deception. My father urged me to return to the company, suggesting work would provide structure and purpose. My mother advocated for an extended sabbatical, perhaps travel, time in nature, distance from the scene of the crime. My therapist recommended small steps, establishing new routines, reconnecting with old friends, finding activities that belonged solely to me, untainted by memories of Rebecca. I chose none of these paths. Instead, I sold our house, my house, without ever returning to collect personal belongings. Whatever remained inside felt contaminated by her presence. I rented a sparsely furnished apartment overlooking Boston Harbor and devoted myself to a single purpose: understanding who she really was. The FBI had hit bureaucratic walls and jurisdictional complications, but I had resources they didn't: unlimited funds, international connections through our company, and most importantly, intimate knowledge of the woman herself. Whatever performance she had given during our marriage, there had been moments of truth. Small revelations, inconsistencies, genuine reactions she couldn't entirely suppress. I hired private investigators across Europe. I established connections with former intelligence officers who operated in the shadows of legitimate authority. I created a dedicated room in my apartment with walls covered in timelines, photographs, and maps tracking possible sightings and connections. My family worried I was becoming obsessed, unable to move forward. My father staged an intervention 6 months into my investigation. "You're letting her continue to destroy you," he argued. "Every day you spend chasing ghosts is another day she wins." "This isn't about winning," I tried to explain. "It's about understanding." "Understanding what? That she's a sociopath? That you were targeted? We already know these things, Daniel." "I need to know who she is," I insisted. "Not just who she pretended to be." My father placed a hand on my shoulder, his expression grave. "Son, listen to me. There is no who she really is. People like her. They're hollow at the center. They become whatever serves their purpose. The woman you're chasing doesn't exist." His words haunted me, but didn't deter me. I continued my search, following leads across continents, a boutique owner in Prague who recognized her photograph, a university in Belgrade with records of a student whose papers matched Rebecca's writing style, a pharmaceutical conference where a woman fitting her description had approached representatives from our competitors. Each fragment revealed a piece of her true identity, not the name she was born with, but the capabilities she possessed. Fluency in at least 6 languages. Advanced knowledge of biochemistry focused specifically on toxicology. Connections to former Soviet scientific programs, training in identity creation, and social engineering. She was a weapon designed for the modern age, a perfectly calibrated instrument of corporate espionage in an era where proprietary formulas were worth more than gold. 1 year after her escape, my private investigators traced her to a research facility outside of Geneva. Surveillance photos showed a woman who matched her physical dimensions entering the building daily, face carefully turned away from security cameras. Employment records listed her as Dr. Elise Kovac, molecular researcher, with credentials from universities that didn't quite check out when examined closely. I flew to Switzerland immediately, prepared to confront her, though I had no clear plan for what would happen next. Closure? Justice? Something more complicated that I couldn't articulate even to myself? But when I arrived, Dr. Kovac had already resigned her position and disappeared. The timing wasn't coincidental. She had known I was coming, which meant she was still monitoring me, just as I was monitoring her. In my hotel room that night, I found a small package waiting for me, cleared by the front desk as a delivery from a local pharmacy. Inside was a vial of clear liquid and a handwritten note on expensive stationery. For your kidneys, twice daily with meals. This one heals instead of harms. I should have reported it to authorities immediately. Instead, I had it analyzed privately. It contained a compound unknown to commercial medicine, a specialized treatment that clinical testing revealed could potentially reverse thallium damage to renal tissue. An offering, an apology, a taunt. Perhaps all 3. I flushed it down the toilet and booked my return flight. That night, as my plane soared over the Atlantic, I finally accepted a truth I'd been avoiding. I would never fully understand the woman who had nearly destroyed me. And more importantly, I no longer needed to. Healing doesn't happen in a straight line. It zigzags, doubles back, stalls, and sometimes moves in directions you never anticipated. My physical recovery progressed steadily. My kidney function improved beyond the doctor's expectations. The tremors in my hands gradually subsided, and my hair grew back thicker than before. But my emotional healing charted a more chaotic course. For the first year after Rebecca's escape, I'd been consumed by the need to find her, to understand her. The investigation had given me purpose, a reason to push through each day. But that night in Geneva marked a turning point. Flushing her gift down the toilet was a symbolic act, a rejection not just of the compound she'd offered, but of the power she still held over my life. I returned to Boston with a new resolution, to reclaim myself from the wreckage of her deception. The first step was the hardest. I had to face the company I'd abandoned during my obsessive search. Harrington Pharmaceuticals had continued under my father's guidance, but my extended absence had fueled rumors and uncertainty. My return to headquarters was met with awkward smiles and careful conversations. Employees who had sent flowers during my illness now struggled to meet my eyes, unsure whether to acknowledge what had happened or pretend nothing had changed. I called a company-wide meeting my first day back. Standing before 300 employees, I felt more vulnerable than I had in the hospital at my weakest. Most of you know what happened to me, I began, my voice steadier than I expected. A woman posing as my wife systematically poisoned me while attempting to steal research that all of you helped create. She nearly succeeded on both counts. The silence in the room was absolute. I could feel their collective discomfort, their pity. I'm not here to ask for sympathy, I continued. I'm here to tell you that what she did was not just a crime against me or my family. It was a crime against every person in this room, against the work we do and the patients we serve. I paused, scanning their faces. Our competitors were willing to commit murder to access our research because what we're creating matters. The treatments we're developing will save lives. That purpose doesn't change because one person betrayed us. I saw something shift in their expressions. Pity transforming into something like resolve. I spent a year chasing ghosts, looking for answers about who she really was. I won't apologize for that time away. I needed it. But I've realized something important. Who she was matters far less than who I choose to be now. By the end of that meeting, the dynamic had changed. No longer was I the victim to be pitied, the fool who'd been deceived. I was simply a man who had survived, who was choosing to move forward with purpose. I threw myself back into work, but with a different approach than before. Where I had once been obsessed with profits and expansion, I now focused on the research itself, particularly on treatments for conditions that had limited funding or attention. The autoimmune medication that Rebecca had targeted became my personal project. I worked alongside our scientists, using my own medical experience to refine the drug delivery system. 6 months after my return, we achieved a breakthrough, a formulation that reduced side effects while improving efficacy. The FDA fast-tracked approval, and clinical trials showed promise beyond our initial expectations. The treatment that my would-be killer had sought to steal was now saving lives, including patients with conditions similar to what she had deliberately inflicted on me. There was poetic justice in that transformation, turning her weapon into a shield for others. My personal life underwent similar reconstruction. I sold my apartment with its wall of investigation materials and purchased a modern glass house overlooking the coast north of Boston. The open design and expansive windows were the opposite of the traditional home I'd shared with Rebecca. No hidden spaces, no shadows, everything visible and transparent. I joined a support group for survivors of intimate partner violence, the only man among a dozen women. Their stories were different from mine in specifics, but the underlying pattern was the same. Trust manipulated, love weaponized, identity dismantled. In their company, I found understanding without judgment, strength without pretense. We recognized in each other the particular courage it takes to trust again after betrayal. Through one of the group members, I met Dr. Eleanor Chen, a specialist in trauma psychology who had survived her own encounter with deception. Our professional relationship evolved into friendship, and gradually into something deeper. We moved cautiously, both hyper-aware of warning signs, both committed to absolute honesty, even when it was uncomfortable. On our third date, I showed her my medical records, the evidence of what Rebecca had done to my body. "I need you to understand what happened to me," I explained, "and that I may never fully recover." Eleanor studied the documents with clinical focus, then set them aside. "Thank you for trusting me with this," she said simply. "Now, shall we talk about something else for the rest of the evening?" That moment, her acknowledgement without dwelling, her respect for my past without being defined by it, felt like permission to step fully into a new chapter. 2 years after Rebecca's disappearance, international authorities contacted the FBI with a development. A woman matching her description had been arrested in connection with a similar case in Berlin. A corporate executive poisoned over months while company research went missing. The German authorities wanted to compare notes, potentially connect the cases. The FBI called to inform me, offering to keep me updated on developments. I thanked them politely, then asked them not to contact me about her again unless absolutely necessary. "You're not interested in her capture?" the agent asked, surprised. "I'm interested in justice," I clarified. "But my life is no longer defined by her actions. If you need my testimony, I'll provide it. Otherwise, I'd prefer to focus on the present." After I hung up, Eleanor found me on the deck overlooking the ocean, my expression thoughtful but not distressed. "Everything okay?" she asked, joining me at the railing. "They may have found her," I said. "In Germany. Another poisoning." She studied my face carefully. "How do you feel about that?" I considered the question honestly. Like I'm reading about a character in a book I finished a long time ago. I recognize the story, but it's not mine anymore. That evening, as the sun set over the Atlantic, I realized how far I'd traveled from the man who had obsessively tracked his poisoner across continents. The compulsion to understand her had been replaced by something healthier, a commitment to understanding myself, to building a life defined by choice rather than reaction. My father, watching my transformation over those 2 years, finally broached the subject of succession planning again. "The company will need new leadership when I retire," he said during a family dinner. "You've proven yourself more than capable, especially this past year." The offer meant everything: a vote of confidence, an acknowledgement of my recovery, a restoration of what Rebecca had nearly stolen from me. But I surprised both of us with my answer. "I'm honored, Dad, but I think I might be more valuable elsewhere in the organization." His eyebrows rose. "Elsewhere?" "I'm considering establishing a new research division," I explained, "focused specifically on treatments for poisoning and heavy metal toxicity. There's been minimal innovation in that field for decades, but our experience with the autoimmune drug shows promise for application." My father studied me with newfound respect. "You want to specialize in treatments for what nearly killed you. Sometimes the best healing comes from helping others heal," I said simply. Within 6 months, the Harrington Toxicology Research Center opened its doors, a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to advancing treatments for poison victims. We recruited top scientists from around the world, established partnerships with emergency medicine departments, and began developing protocols that would eventually reduce mortality rates from metal poisoning by 30%. The center became my legacy, not a monument to what I had survived, but a transformation of that experience into something that saved others. Each life extended, each recovery facilitated, represented a victory over what Rebecca had intended. 3 years after the airport confrontation, I found myself there again. Terminal E, early morning, waiting for a flight to a medical conference in Copenhagen, where I would present our latest research findings. I sat in almost the exact spot where I had first seen Rebecca in her disguise, preparing to disappear while I recovered from her poisoning. The terminal hummed with the same energy. Travelers rushing toward destinations, emotional goodbyes, new beginnings. I watched a couple embracing near the security checkpoint, their farewell tinged with the promise of reunion. I observed a businessman checking his watch impatiently, a family corralling excited children, a woman sitting alone with a faraway expression. Any of them could be hiding secrets. Any of them could be wearing masks. But that knowledge no longer filled me with paranoia or dread. The possibility of deception existed, would always exist. But so did the possibility of genuine connection, of relationships built on truth rather than manipulation. As my flight was called, I stood with a sense of calm purpose. The tremor in my right hand, a permanent souvenir of thallium poisoning, was barely noticeable as I gathered my carry-on. I walked toward the gate with steady steps, leaving behind the ghost of the man who had once sat in this terminal, broken and obsessed. I was no longer defined by what she had done to me, but by what I had chosen to do with the life that remained. The poison she had intended to end me had instead catalyzed a transformation. In trying to destroy me, she had inadvertently revealed a strength I never knew I possessed, the capacity to rebuild not just a life, but a purpose from absolute devastation. As the plane lifted into the clouds, I thought about the countless patients who would benefit from the research I was about to present. People who, like me, had encountered poison in their lives, whether literally or metaphorically, and were fighting to survive it. My work now offered them something my own doctors hadn't been able to give me: targeted treatment, faster diagnosis, better outcomes. The woman who had nearly killed me was still out there somewhere, doubtless wearing a new identity, perhaps poisoning another target. But she no longer haunted my dreams or occupied my thoughts. The airport where she had almost escaped was now simply a waypoint on my journey toward something more important than revenge or even justice. It had become the site of my rebirth. 5 years to the day after I first saw Rebecca at Logan Airport, preparing to disappear while I recovered from her poisoning, I received a call from the FBI. The Berlin lead had gone cold years ago. Another ghost, another false identity abandoned. But now there was something concrete. "We've found her," Agent Dawson said without preamble. "This time, we're certain." I sat in my office at the research center, overlooking the laboratory where our team was testing a new chelation therapy. Through the glass walls, I could see Eleanor consulting with one of the scientists, her gestures animated as she explained a psychological protocol for treating poison survivors. We had married 6 months earlier, a small ceremony on the beach behind our home, attended by family and close friends. Her engagement ring caught the light as she pointed to something on the computer screen. "Where?" I asked, my voice neutral. "Argentina, a private medical facility outside Buenos Aires. She's been working there under the name Sofia Madero for approximately 14 months. I absorbed this information calmly. "And you're certain it's her?" "DNA confirmation from items in her apartment. We've been monitoring for 3 weeks before making contact with you." I watched Eleanor laugh at something the scientist said. Her joy, genuine, unguarded, still felt like a miracle in my life. "What happens now?" I asked. "Argentina has agreed to extradition. We've coordinated with local authorities. The arrest is scheduled for tomorrow morning." I should have felt vindication, perhaps even satisfaction. Instead, I felt a strange hollowness, as if hearing about a distant historical event rather than the capture of the woman who had almost ended my life. "There's something else," Agent Dawson continued. "Something you should know before it hits the news." A pause. "She's dying, Mr. Harrington. Advanced pancreatic cancer. The medical facility where she's working specializes in experimental treatments. According to her doctors, she has perhaps 3 months." The irony wasn't lost on me. The poisoner, facing her own internal betrayal, cells multiplying without restraint, body turning against itself. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. "There's more," Dawson continued. "She's been using her position to access their research database, but she hasn't been stealing information this time. She's been contributing to it, uploading research on advanced toxicology treatments, including several papers on thallium poisoning recovery. The information landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward, disturbing the careful narrative I'd constructed about who Rebecca was, what had motivated her. "She's requesting to speak with you," Dawson finished. "Before the arrest, before the media gets hold of the story. She's offering full cooperation, all her contacts, every operation she's been involved with, in exchange for one conversation." Eleanor had noticed me on the phone, my expression giving away something of the call's significance. She excused herself from the scientist and was making her way toward my office. "I need to think about this," I told Dawson. "Of course, but we'll need your decision within 12 hours. The operation is in motion." After ending the call, I explained the situation to Eleanor. She listened without interruption, her training as a psychologist evident in her careful attention. "Do you want to see her?" she asked when I finished. "I don't know," I admitted. 5 years ago, I was obsessed with finding her, understanding her. Now that it's possible, I trailed off, uncertain how to articulate the complex emotions colliding within me. "It's not about what she deserves, or what might benefit the investigation," Eleanor said gently. "This is about what you need for your own closure." I considered her words carefully. "What would you do?" I asked finally. She took my hands in hers, her touch steady and warm. "I can't answer that for you, but I know that whatever you decide, it won't undo everything you've built since she left. You're not that wounded man in the airport anymore." That night I stood on our deck overlooking the ocean, replaying the years since Rebecca had entered and exited my life. The devastation of her betrayal, the long, painful recovery, the obsessive search for answers, and finally, the rebuilding, not just of my health and career, but of my capacity to trust, to connect, to love. I had transformed the poison she'd given me into medicine for others. I had reclaimed my name, my family legacy, my future. I had found love again with someone who honored both my strength and my scars. Did I need to confront my would-be killer one final time? Or would seeing her, especially in her diminished state, reopen wounds better left sealed? By morning, I had my answer. 48 hours later, I walked into a secure room at the medical facility in Buenos Aires. The Argentine Federal Police had established a perimeter, but honored the FBI's request for this unusual meeting. The terms were clear: 30 minutes, recorded, with agents monitoring from an adjacent room. I would be protected. She would be arrested immediately afterward. The woman waiting for me bore little resemblance to the Rebecca I had married, or even to the Valeria I had glimpsed at the airport 5 years earlier. Cancer had hollowed her cheeks and dulled the sheen of her hair, now grown long again and streaked with premature gray. Her frame, once athletic and graceful, seemed fragile beneath the simple white blouse and black pants she wore. Only her eyes remained unchanged, alert, intelligent, assessing. She didn't stand when I entered. Whether from weakness or calculation, I couldn't tell. "Daniel," she said, my name in her voice sending an unexpected shiver of memory through me. "You look well." "You don't," I replied, taking the seat across from her. "No point in pretenses." A slight smile touched her lips. "Terminal pancreatic cancer. The ultimate assassin. Even I have to admire its efficiency." I studied her. This stranger who had shared my bed, my name, my life for 3 years. "Why did you want to see me?" She considered the question, her fingers tracing an idle pattern on the table between us. I noticed a slight tremor, whether from illness or emotion I couldn't determine. "Closure, perhaps," she said finally. "For both of us." "I found my closure years ago," I countered. "Without your help." "Yes," she acknowledged. "You've done remarkably well. The research center, your marriage, the new chelation therapy trials showing promise in phase 2 testing." My eyebrows rose. "You've been monitoring me." "Old habits," she admitted. "Though my interest has evolved from professional to something else." "Something else?" I repeated skeptically. She met my gaze directly. "Redemption isn't the right word. I'm not seeking forgiveness, Daniel. I don't expect or deserve that from you. What I did was unforgivable." "Then what do you want from me?" "Understanding," she said simply. "Before I die, I want one person in this world to know the complete truth. You're the only one with the right to hear it." I leaned back, keeping my expression neutral. "I'm listening." She drew a deep breath. "I was recruited at 16 from a state orphanage in Belarus. Exceptional academic performance, no family connections, psychological profile indicating high intelligence with low emotional attachment. The perfect candidate. For what exactly? A program designed to create specialized assets for industrial espionage. The Cold War had ended, but the war for technological dominance was just beginning. Pharmaceuticals, biotech, advanced materials, these became the new battlegrounds. We were trained to infiltrate, extract, and disappear. "And the poisoning?" I pressed. "Was that part of your training too?" Her expression flickered. "Yes and no. We were taught various methods. Thallium was considered elegant, difficult to detect, symptoms easily attributed to other causes. But the application was always meant to be terminal. Quick elimination of obstacles. Yet you didn't kill me," I observed. "You were quite clear about that during our interview. The dosage was calculated for incapacitation, not death." "Yes." For the first time, she looked away. That was a deviation from protocol. "Why?" She was silent for a long moment. "Because I couldn't do it," she finally said, her voice barely audible. "I prepared the lethal dose. I measured it out the night before. But when morning came, when you kissed me goodbye before heading to work," she trailed off, then continued with visible effort. "I diluted it. Then again the next day, and the next. I told myself it was tactical, that your death would create complications, investigations. But that was a lie, I told myself. I felt a complex surge of emotions. Anger that she would claim this moral line after months of systematic poisoning, yet disturbed by the ring of truth in her words. "You were still willing to destroy my health, my kidneys, my life," I pointed out. "Yes," she acknowledged, not defending herself. "I compartmentalized. Told myself it was temporary damage, that you would eventually recover. The human capacity for self-deception is remarkable, even in someone trained to manipulate others." She pressed her palms flat against the table, as if steadying herself. "When I saw you at the airport that day, I knew instantly that everything had unraveled. But what you couldn't have known was that I'd already begun dismantling my exit strategy. What do you mean? The money transfers I'd arranged. I'd canceled them the day before. The contacts waiting in Buenos Aires. I'd cut communications. The research data I'd spent 3 years collecting. I destroyed it the night before my flight. She shook her head slightly. I was experiencing something like a breakdown. An identity crisis, I suppose you could call it. Why are you telling me this? I asked, skepticism evident in my voice. It changes nothing about what you did. It changes nothing, she agreed. But perhaps it explains the research I've been contributing on thallium poisoning. The treatments I've been developing. She met my eyes directly. Your research center has been using some of my protocols, though you didn't know their source. The delivery mechanism for your new chelation therapy? That was my work. Published under a pseudonym. I stared at her, processing this revelation. The breakthrough that had accelerated our treatment development had indeed come from an obscure journal article, author unknown. You've been trying to atone, I realized aloud. I've been trying to balance the scales, she corrected. Redemption isn't possible, but contribution might be. She reached into a folder beside her, withdrawing several papers. These are formulas for 3 additional treatments, more advanced than what you're currently testing. I've been developing them here, using resources that will no longer be available to me after today. I made no move to take them. Why should I trust anything from you? You shouldn't, she said simply. Have your team verify everything independently, but don't dismiss potentially life-saving treatments because of their source. She pushed the papers across the table. There's something else you should know. Your infertility. I had nothing to do with that, but I have reason to believe it wasn't natural either. I felt a cold certainty settle over me. What do you mean? Your father, she said quietly. I found medical records while searching his office for company information. He had you treated as a child, some experimental procedure he funded to prevent certain genetic conditions from being passed to future generations. The sterility was an uncalculated side effect. The revelation hit like a physical blow. You're lying, I said reflexively. Why would I? She countered. I have nothing to gain by inventing this. The records are stored in a safe deposit box at First National Bank, box 4721. I left the key in the back of the Neruda poetry book in your bedroom. I remembered the book, a first edition she'd given me on our first anniversary. I'd left it behind with everything else in the house I'd sold without returning. My father wouldn't, I began, then stopped, remembering his fierce protectiveness, his anxiety about hereditary conditions that had affected his own father. He thought he was protecting you, she said. Parents often do terrible things with the best intentions. Something else I've learned in recent years. I studied her face, searching for the manipulation, the calculated deception I'd come to associate with every interaction between us. Instead, I saw something I'd never witnessed before. A raw, unguarded expression that looked almost like peace. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, she said again. Just your understanding that people, even people like me, can be more complicated than they appear. You weren't merely a target to me, Daniel. You were the first real thing in a lifetime of fabrications. The timer on the wall showed 5 minutes remaining in our allotted time. What will you do now? I asked. After the arrest, the extradition? A small smile touched her lips. I'll die before the trial begins. My doctors give me weeks, not months. I've declined further treatment. You're surrendering, I observed, surprised. I'm choosing my ending, she corrected. After a lifetime of having my story written by others, I'm claiming the final chapter for myself. I found myself nodding, understanding this impulse in a way I hadn't expected. The people you worked for, I said. They'll come after you for cooperating. They already have, she replied, pulling up her sleeve to reveal a jagged scar running from wrist to elbow. 2 months ago, I was faster. He wasn't. Our time was nearly up. The agents would be entering soon to take her into custody. In these final moments, I felt the weight of all that had passed between us. The love that never existed, the betrayal that nearly killed me, and the strange, twisted, parallel journeys we'd traveled since that day at the airport. I won't forgive you, I said finally, standing to leave. But I believe you. About not being able to kill me, about the research, maybe even about my father. Relief flickered across her features. That's more than I expected. I gathered the research papers, folding them carefully. I don't know who you really are. Your real name, your true history. I don't think anyone does. Maybe not even you anymore. No, she agreed softly. But in those final months with you, I came closest to finding out. The door opened. Agents entered, hands on weapons, expressions professionally neutral. Our time was up. Goodbye, Daniel, she said as they approached. Live well. Goodbye, I replied, using neither of the names I'd known her by. Some people transcend simple identification, becoming instead an experience, a lesson, a turning point rather than a person. I walked out without looking back, the research papers secure in my hand. Outside the facility, the Buenos Aires sun was blinding, the air heavy with humidity and the scent of flowering trees. Eleanor waited by our rental car, her expression concerned but supportive. Are you all right? She asked as I approached. I considered the question honestly. Yes, I said finally. Better than I expected. Did you get what you needed? I looked back at the medical facility, where the woman who had nearly destroyed me was facing the consequences of her choices, along with her own mortality. I think we both did, I answered, in different ways. As we drove away, I felt the final weight of those years lifting. The poison she had administered hadn't killed me, it had transformed me. And in some strange, unintended way, it had transformed her, too. We had become different people in the aftermath of her betrayal, both changed by the toxicity we had shared. I had survived the poison she made for me. Now she was the one imprisoned, both by justice and by her failing body. But the legacy of our connection would continue in the research that would save others, in the center that had emerged from our shared destruction, in the man I had become after surviving her. What will you do with the research? Eleanor asked as we headed toward the airport. I looked at the papers beside me, potentially life-saving treatments born from the hands that had once measured poison into my breakfast. Verify it, improve it, use it to help people, I said. Transform it into something good, just as I had transformed myself. Standing at the airport gate 5 years after our lives first collided there, I realized the most powerful revenge isn't watching her suffer behind bars. It's thriving in the life she tried to take from me, turning her poison into medicine that saves others, and understanding that true justice isn't found in her imprisonment, but in my liberation.